Do you ever feel that the more you try to explain yourself, the more people doubt you? That the more you react, the more you seem weak? That the more you defend yourself, the more you look guilty? There is something that few people discover throughout their lives, and those who do change completely. It doesn't just change the way you act. It changes your posture. It changes your look. It even changes the weight that your body carries. This thing is called sovereign silence, and it's not about being passive. It's not about swallowing frogs. It's not weakness disguised as spirituality. It's the exact opposite of that. The most feared, most respected, and most unshakable people in history, spiritually, psychologically, and socially, had one thing in common. They didn't fight back. They didn't justify themselves. They just moved on. With God on their side, as if the judgment of others were a passing whim, and the world unable to explain ended up bowing down. Modern psychology has a name for what happens when you stop reacting: high-level emotional regulation. But the ancients had a simpler name: faith in motion, because those who react reveal. Those who justify themselves beg for approval, and those who beg for approval have handed over control of their own lives into the hands of those who don't love you, don't know you, and probably will never understand you. What you're going to see in this video will bother you. It'll remind you of situations where you've lost your peace trying to prove something to someone who never wanted to listen to you. It'll make you realize how many times you've reacted and walked away diminished, exhausted, embarrassed. But it will also show you the way back to yourself, because there is a version of you that is not shaken by other people's opinions, that does not lose sleep because of what they said, that does not rehearse answers in your head at 3 in the morning, a version that walks slowly, steadily, in silence, with God in front of you leading the way. This version is not a distant dream. It is waiting for you on the other side of a simple decision. Stop reacting and start trusting. Stay until the end, because what comes next may be exactly what you've needed to hear for years. And no one has yet had the courage to speak to you with that clarity. The day you stop explaining yourself to everyone. There is a day in the life of certain people that changes everything. It is not a day marked on the calendar. There is no party. There is no announcement. There is no post on social networks. It is a silent day, almost invisible to those on the outside. But inside, it is a complete revolution. It's the day you look at someone who's questioning you, judging you, demanding an explanation, and you just don't open your mouth. Not because you don't have anything to say, but because you finally understood that you don't have to. That day comes for a few, and it comes expensively. It comes after a lot of wasted energy, a lot of wasted night rehearsing answers, a lot of conversation that ended with you feeling even more misunderstood than before you started. It comes after you realize in practice that explaining is no use, that justifying yourself does not convince those who have already decided what they want to believe, that reacting only feeds the fire that the other has lit in your life. Psychology calls this the locus of internal control. It's when you stop seeking external validation and start anchoring yourself in what you know about yourself. That's when the other's opinion loses the power to define you. But in real life, in everyday life, this doesn't happen in a theoretical way. It happens in a concrete, painful situation where you are about to react again. And something inside you said, no, enough. And this enough changes everything. Think for a moment about how many times you've explained yourself and left the conversation feeling smaller. How many times you've sent that long, detailed message trying to make the person understand, and they just ignored it, twisted it, or used it against you. How many times have you stayed up late crafting arguments for an audience that never intended to listen to you honestly? Each time you did this, you gave away something precious: your energy, your peace, and a piece of your self-esteem. Because when you justify yourself without anyone asking you for satisfaction, you're unconsciously saying, I need your approval to feel good about myself. And the person on the other end, consciously or not, receives this message clearly and starts to use it as a bargaining chip, as control, as power over you. It's not necessarily evil, it's human dynamics. People naturally adapt to what works. If reacting works to make you mad, they'll keep reacting. If complaining makes you run to explain yourself, they'll keep complaining. You, without realizing it, taught the people around you how to manipulate you. But this cycle has a way out, and it is simpler and more difficult than it seems. You stop. You don't respond. You don't defend yourself. You don't elaborate. You don't send a 6-minute audio explaining your intentions. You breathe, look inside, and remember who you are. Remember what God knows about you. Remember that truth doesn't need marketing, that true character reveals itself with time, not with speech. There is a verse that few truly apply. The Lord will fight for you, and you will be silent. Exodus 14:14. God didn't say this as a suggestion. He said it as a strategy. When you stop warring with your mouth, you free up the space for something bigger to act in your place. Science also confirms this in another way. Studies in behavioral neuroscience show that people who react impulsively to criticism activate the amygdala, the center of fear in the brain, and make decisions based on panic, not wisdom. People who pause before responding, or simply do not respond, activate the prefrontal cortex, the region of clarity, reasoning, and long-term vision. In other words, when you react, you are operating with the brain in survival mode. When you silence, you think like someone who has a future, and there's more. When you stop explaining yourself, something curious happens to the people around you. They become uncomfortable because silence leaves no room for distortion. There is no argument to refute. There is no emotion to explore. Silence is a glass wall, transparent, firm, insurmountable. Those who were waiting for a reaction from you to feel powerful run out of fuel. And then the dynamics reverse. The day you stop explaining yourself to everyone isn't the day you give up. It's the day you truly mature. It's the day you decide that your peace is worth more than any argument won. That your energy is too sacred to be wasted on those who don't even deserve your attention, let alone your defense. That day could be today. You don't need to announce. You don't need to explain to anyone that you've changed. Just walk in silence with God in front and let time do what your mouth could never do. Why fighting back is the greatest proof that they won. Nobody likes to admit that, but it needs to be said clearly, bluntly. Every time you react, you lose. Not necessarily the argument, but you lose something much more valuable, control over yourself. And when you lose control over yourself, the other person has won. Simple as that. This is not abstract philosophy. It is psychology applied to everyday life. When someone provokes you and you react with anger, with crying, with accelerated justification, with sarcasm, with over-defending, you are sending an unmistakable signal. You have affected me. And affecting someone is the most primitive form of power that exists between human beings. Think about the times when someone said something about you and you ruminated for hours or days. You went over the situation in your head, thought about what you should have answered, got angry at yourself for keeping quiet, or angry for responding in a way that made you look small. Either way, the person took up a huge space in your mind. They rented a room in your head for nothing. That's what reaction does. It transfers power. There's a concept in psychology called intermittent reinforcement. When someone teases you and you react from time to time, sometimes you ignore it, sometimes you explode. It creates an addictive pattern for the teaser, like a slot machine. You don't know when the prize will come out, but you keep pulling the lever. Your reaction is the prize, and as long as you keep delivering that prize, even if it's rare, the person will keep betting. The only way to end this game is to stop playing. But why is it so hard not to react? Why does it seem almost physically impossible to be silent when someone says something that hits you deep? Because the human brain was programmed for this. Reaction is an ancestral survival mechanism. When our ancestors were threatened, reacting meant surviving. The problem is that the brain does not distinguish very well between a lion in the savannah and a mean comment on social networks. For him, threat is threat. And the automatic answer is attack or flee. What no one has taught you is that there is a third option: stay put. It doesn't run away. It doesn't attack. It just observes. It breathes. It consciously chooses whether or not to spend energy on it. And that choice, That pause between the stimulus and the response is where all of his freedom lives. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, said something that should be engraved on every wall. Between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response is our growth and our freedom. When you react without thinking, you live like an animal. When you pause and choose, you live as a conscious human being. And when you pause, choose silence, and trust God's process, you live as someone who has understood the game on a level that most will never reach. There is a detail that most ignore. Those who provoke are usually suffering. It's not an excuse. It's a diagnosis. People at peace with themselves don't take pleasure in belittling others. People who attack, provoke, judge nonstop, they're screaming in their own way that they're in pain, that they're feeling small, that they need external power because internally they're empty. When you understand this, the reaction loses its meaning. You don't fight with someone who has a fever. You walk away, take care of yourself, and let time and God take care of the rest. Not reacting is not weakness. It is the correct diagnosis of the situation. It is refusing to feed a cycle that only harms you. It is emotional maturity in its pure state. And there's a practical consequence of this that no one mentions. When you stop reacting, the people who were testing you run out of ground. Because their script depended on your reaction. Without it, the script crashes. The provocation loses its destination. And the one who provoked starts to feel ridiculous. Not you. The greatest victory is not to win the argument. It is to leave the situation in one piece, in peace, without having given any piece of yourself to those who did not deserve it. This is truly winning, in silence, with dignity, with God as a witness. The silence that scares more than any answer. There's one thing people don't expect from you. One thing that destabilizes more than any brilliant argument, any sharp response, any public exposure. A simple, free thing that's available to anyone at any time. But that very few have the discipline and courage to use. Silence. Not the timid silence of those who don't know what to say. Not the embarrassed silence of those who are swallowing their tears. The sovereign silence. The silence of those who know exactly what they could say and choose not to say it. This kind of silence has a different weight, a different presence, and people feel it. Have you ever been in a situation where someone was attacking you, waiting for your reaction, and you just didn't react? If so, you know what happens. The air changes. The person becomes uncomfortable. They start talking more, explaining themselves, climbing, because the silence of the other is a mirror that they can't escape. And in that mirror, they see themselves. And what they see is usually not pretty. Silence forces responsibility back on those who deserve to carry it. Social psychology has fascinating studies on this. When one person makes an aggressive or unfair statement and the other person doesn't respond, the discomfort falls on the speaker. The human brain is programmed to seek balance in social exchange, action and reaction, attack and defense. When you break this pattern with silence, you create a vacuum that the other person is compelled to fill, and when you fill, it usually reveals itself even more. Has it ever happened to you that someone says something and you keep quiet, and they keep talking, going deeper until you get to a point where it was clear to everyone in the room who the problem was? That wasn't an accident. It was the silence doing its job. Jesus understood this like no one else. When the Pharisees brought him the woman caught in adultery, expecting him to condemn her or compromise politically, he didn't respond right away. He bent down and began writing on the floor. The silence created tension. It created space. And when he finally spoke, the words had a weight that no hasty response would have. He who is without sin cast the first stone. And one by one, they left. The silence set the stage for the truth to land. But there is a point that needs to be said honestly. Silence only works when it comes from a place of strength, not fear. There is a huge difference between being silent because you are afraid of conflict and being silent because you chose not to waste your energy. The first diminishes you. The second elevates you. How do you know where your silence comes from? Simple. Notice how you feel afterwards. If you have been quiet and you have your stomach upset, full of pent-up anger, feeling that you have lost, your silence has been escape. If you have been quiet and you feel a strange calm, a sense that you have done the right thing, that you have preserved something precious, your silence has been power. Developing this second type of silence takes time. It takes self-knowledge. It takes a lot of prayer and a lot of practice to observe yourself in real time. But when you get there, something definitely changes in the way you move through the world. People begin to realize that you are different. They can't destabilize you easily. They can't put you on the defensive. And this, when paradoxically, makes you more respected, not less. Because in the collective unconscious, those who don't need to defend themselves seem to have nothing to hide. And those who have nothing to hide seem unshakable. Silence communicates confidence. It communicates that you know who you are, that you don't need the audience's approval to feel good about yourself. And that message goes deeper than any argument ever would. Walk in silence. Let God be your defense. And watch as the world slowly, without understanding why, begins to treat you differently. God doesn't need your defense. He just needs your trust. This truth will cost you something to accept, because it goes against everything that human pride wants to do when it is attacked, when it is misinterpreted, when it is wronged. God doesn't need you to defend him, and he doesn't need you to defend yourself. He only needs one thing, that you trust. It sounds simple, but it's probably the hardest thing there is for a human being to do, especially when injustice is happening right now, when lying is spreading right now, when people are judging you right now and you have all the evidence in your hand to prove them wrong. It is exactly in these moments that faith is truly tested, not in peace, in the storm. There is a subtle trap that many people fall into without realizing it. The trap of thinking that if you don't defend yourself, the truth will be buried. That if you don't explain, people will continue to believe the lie. That silence is equivalent to agreeing with the accusation. But think for a moment. How many times in your life have you defended yourself with all the energy you had, and the lie kept circulating the same way? How many times have you spent hours explaining your version, and the person just wouldn't listen? How many times has your defense been used as ammunition against you? Human defense has a limit. God's intervention does not. There is a spiritual principle that is also perfectly aligned with psychology. When you stop fighting for your name and surrender that battle to God, you release a force that is beyond your ability to understand. It is not passivity, it is redirection. It is recognizing that there are battles that were not made for your hands. David understood this. When Saul pursued him, when his life was on the line, when he had every human reason to fight back, he didn't fight back. Even though he had the opportunity to kill Saul while he slept in the cave, David cut off only the edge of his cloak and retreated. And he said something that resonates to this day. Far be it from me that I do such a thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed. David trusted that God would take care of the situation, and God did. Saul fell. David was king. The lesson is not passivity. The lesson is discernment. Knowing when to act and when to back down. And in most reputational wars, judgmental wars, slander wars, God is telling you to step back and let him act. Trusting God with your situation is the bravest act there is, because it requires you to relinquish control, and humans love control. We defend, explain, react, all in a desperate attempt to control what people think of us, as if our approval depended on our defensive performance. But the identity of a child of God does not depend on the human verdict. It depends on the divine verdict. And that verdict has already been given. You are loved, you are known, you are guarded. When it really gets into your heart, not just your head, you stop having to stand up for your image. Because your real image isn't in people's hands, it's in God's hands. And God does not lose processes. Walk, trust, be quiet, and wait, not with anxiety, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knows that the owner of the universe is taking care of the details that you can't even see. What happens to bad-mouthers when you stop calling? This will surprise you, because common sense says the opposite. Common sense says, if you don't react, people will keep talking. They will think they can. They will interpret your silence as weakness, as an admission of guilt, as cowardice. The reality is quite different. When you genuinely stop calling, you don't pretend you don't care, you really stop. A series of predictable, almost mechanical things happen that psychology has already mapped out precisely, and none of them are bad for you. All, without exception, work in your favor. First, those who speak badly are left without an internal audience. The gossip, the criticism, the slander, all of these need a reaction to continue existing. When you react, you validate the subject. When you truly ignore it, the subject loses oxygen. And without oxygen, the fire goes out. The people who were commenting on you realize that the topic is dead because you didn't feed it, and dead doesn't generate engagement. Second, those who speak badly eventually expose themselves. There is a fascinating phenomenon called the smear boomerang effect. When someone insists on speaking ill of a person who remains calm, dignified, and productive, the focus of social observation gradually shifts. People begin to realize the obsession of the attacker. They begin to question the motivations. And the one who seemed to be the villain of the story reveals what he really is, someone consumed by resentment. You don't have to do anything. Just keep being who you are. Time does the curation. Third, their absence of reaction creates a narrative more powerful than any defense. When people see that you were attacked, bad-mouthed, judged, and continued with your head held high, smiling, producing, growing, the automatic conclusion is either the criticism was a lie or this person is too strong to be shaken. Either way, you come out bigger. The narrative you build with your actions is worth more than any argument you could build with words. Fourth, those who spoke badly eventually change their attitude. It's not a guarantee. It's not a universal rule, but it happens more often than you think. People who were attacking you, when they didn't get a reaction, when they saw you grow while they stagnated in their own resentment, reach a point of internal crisis. Some come to apologize, others just stop. Others change their attitude without announcing it. And even those who don't change anything externally, something about them changes inside. Because it's impossible to keep hating someone who clearly doesn't carry any hatred back. Fifth, and this is the most important thing, you stop being governed by their agenda. That's real liberation. While you were monitoring what they were saying, reacting to what they were posting, building up a response to what they were saying, they were dictating your pace. Your attention, your energy, your time was being managed by your enemies. Think about the irony of that. When you stop really calling, you take back control of your own schedule. You go back to spending energy on what matters: your growth, your family, your dreams, your relationship with God. And then the gap between you and the person who was attacking you starts to grow at a speed that they can't even keep up with. The most effective revenge there is not a surgical response. It is not a public exposure. It is their quiet prosperity. It is their visible peace. It is their continued growth as they continue to be trapped in the same cycle of resentment. God avenges his own, but not in the way human pride would expect. He doesn't put you on a platform to humiliate the enemy. He simply elevates you. And elevation, in and of itself, is the sentence. How to walk in silence without seeming weak to the world. This is the practical part, because everything that has been said so far may sound beautiful in theory and impossible in practice, especially if you live in an environment where silence is interpreted as submission, where those who don't fight seem to have no value, where the surrounding culture has taught you that you need to impose yourself to be respected. So let's talk about how this really works on a daily basis without romanticism. First, understand that silence is not the absence of posture. One of the biggest confusions is to think that not reacting means accepting everything, agreeing with everything, letting anything go. That's not it. Sovereign silence has posture, it has a limit, it has presence. The difference is that this presence does not need volume to be felt. You can look into the eyes of someone who is disrespecting you without saying a word and communicate with absolute clarity that it will not pass. The body language, the expression, the posture, everything speaks. And when the mouth is quiet, the rest of the body speaks much more accurately. Second, separate silence from absence. Walking in silence does not mean disappearing, isolating yourself. ceasing to be present. It means that you are present completely, but you are not available for dramas that do not build you. You appear, you act, you produce, you serve, but you do not fight. Do not get involved in gossip. Do not waste saliva on those who do not want to grow. Presence without reactivity. That's the formula. Third, build an identity that does not depend on the approval of others. This is the inner work that sustains everything. Because if your self-esteem is anchored in what people think of you, any wind of criticism will knock you down. You will need to react because needing to react is the only way you know to reaffirm yourself. But if your identity is anchored in who God says you are and what you know about yourself from honest experience, external criticism loses its power to define you. It can still hurt, it can still bother, but it can't bring you down because the foundation isn't in it. Work on this foundation every day with prayer, with self-knowledge, with the right people around, with the right words feeding your mind. Fourth, act a lot in silence. The antidote to appearing weak is result. When you're growing, building, developing, and doing it without having to announce it to anyone, you create living evidence that silence wasn't weakness. It was focus. The people who seem the most weak are the ones who talk a lot and do little. The ones who seem stronger are the ones who say little and do a lot. It's no coincidence. It's character revealing itself over time. Fifth, choose your battles wisely. Silence is not an absolute rule. There are situations where you should and need to speak, injustices that need to be named, limits that need to be verbalized, truths that need to be said with clarity and love. Discernment is knowing how to distinguish when silence serves good and when it covers up evil. The question is not, should I always be silent? The question is, does this situation deserve my energy? Is my answer going to build something, or is it just going to fuel chaos? If it's going to build, speak up. If it's just going to fuel chaos, be quiet and walk. Sixth, trust the process. The world will not understand your silence immediately. There will be times when you will seem aloof, distant, or even arrogant to those who do not understand what is going on inside. That is part of it. True transformation is rarely understood before it is completed. But those who walk with God in silence, with confidence, with consistency, arrive in places that those who have been shouting will never reach. Because in the end, the world respects results, respects peace, respects dignity. And these three things are not born from the mouth. They are born from the character built in silence, day after day, step after step, with God as company and eternity as perspective. Walk in silence. Without needing applause, destiny awaits.